welcome to BFI Film Academy Day at Flare 2021. My name is Billy, I'm a Film Academy Young Programmer, and this event is called Beyond Coming of Age. In recent years, we have seen more and more queer characters and narratives enter mainstream cinema, often in what we call coming-of-age stories. These are films in which a protagonist, usually a young person, undergoes a rite of passage, taking them from adolescence to maturity. They have a real stronghold in queer cinema. Think about films like Moonlight and Love, Simon. And today's panel is all about exploring why they hold the weight they do, and also meeting some filmmakers who are looking beyond coming-of-age stories and telling queer stories in genres like sci-fi, horror, and fantasy. A little bit of housekeeping to start us off. We're going to talk for an hour and there will be time for audience questions at the end. If you have a question for the panel, please make sure that you put it in the Q&A box. If you have a more general question about Film Academy, about Flare, about the BFI, please put it in the chat box and Alex from the Film Academy will be monitoring that. It goes without saying, but please respect each other in the chat. Be careful not to reveal any personal information. And also, if you want to network with each other, we have a Facebook group set up for that very purpose, and Alex will link that in the chat as well. Also, just to say that we are recording the session and it will be uploaded to the BFI YouTube channel next week. And now for the fun bit, can I ask the panel to switch on their cameras and mics, please, so that I can introduce you all? Let's see your lovely faces. Amazing. Hello.
Hello.
First of all, we have Thomas Wilson White. Thomas, give us a wave. Hello. Thomas is an award-winning director and screenwriter, and his debut feature, The Greenhouse, is premiering internationally at Flare this year. It's available for the duration of the festival, and you can watch it with Film Academy accreditation if you have it, or you can get a 25 and under ticket for a £5. Next up, we have Thanasis Simponis, an award-winning self-taught film director with a background in film editing. He lives and works in Athens, where he writes and directs short films and TV commercials. His latest film, Escaping the Fragile Planet, has been up for many festivals and awards and is available for free on the BFI Player and on the Flare and Film Academy Facebook pages for the duration of the festival. Next, we have Nosa Eke. Hello, Nosa. Who is a platform agnostic writer and director. In 2018 was picked for the BFI Flare BAFTA Mentorship Programme, and her short horror film, Something in the Closet, was at Flare last year. Nosa is currently working on an interactive podcast with NBC Universal and a debut AR feature with the BFI. Our final panelist is Matthew Jacobs Morgan. Hello. Matthew is a writer and director from London who was included in Deadline's list of rising scribes to look out for in 2021. In 2018, he was part of the 4 Screenwriting Academy, where he developed his queer vampire series, Vamping, sorry. He's also a previous BFI Flare BAFTA mentee and has projects in development with the BFI, AMC, Amazon, and the BBC. So enough rambling from me, let's just get straight to it. It's lovely to see you all. Hello, how are we doing?
Good.
Pretty nice.
Lovely to be here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I was just saying before, it's midnight in Australia, so it's nice to see sunlight coming off my screen.
We're very grateful that you're joining us in the middle of the night.
I actually have nothing better to do. It's awesome to be here.
I'm sure that isn't true, but we'll start by talking about the place of coming-of-age stories within queer cinema more generally. So I want to start by asking the panel, why do we see so many coming-of-age stories in queer film? Does anyone want to take the lead on this?
Yeah, I'll start off, yeah, for sure. I think that queer people have like stunted growth sometimes in terms of like, living freely. And yeah, so often when I talk to friends, they're having their first experiences well into like their 20s and 30s and whatever, do you know what I mean? It's just like ageless in a sense. And so like now filmmaking is more accessible, and queer filmmakers can reach a wider audience now, just with everything that's like technology wise. I think now is the time that these coming of age stories that haven't yet reached the screen are like now being seen. So I think that's my opinion on why they're so prevalent. Yeah.
Anyone have anything to add to that?
Yeah.
No, you go ahead, Thomas.
I think you when you're talking about like, an inciting incident or like something that's really easy to script, when it comes to discovering, your sexuality or like your identity, it's like a no-brainer. And I feel like we've all, been told that that's kind of what the LGBTIQ plus community has to offer. is, you know, just self-discovery, and kind of a full stop after that. You know, I think we can all agree that that's kind of what it feels like we were given. And I think it's now, you know, most excitingly, it feels like we are kind of looking ahead and going, well, you know, maybe we'll stop doing those and actually just explore what we have to say, you know.
Matthew, you had something as well?
No, I couldn't have put it better. That's basically completely on the money, kind of what I was going to say as well. So yeah, I completely agree. I'm in complete agreement.
Okay, and I wanted to ask as well, I mean, when we do see queer characters kind of on the periphery of coming of age stories that focus on straight characters as well, but when it comes to those films where queer characters are at the center, do you feel that they kind of play with the coming of age genre in any way? Do they make us think differently about what it means to come of age? Thanasis, do you have anything on that?
About queer characters coming of age specifically, you mean?
Yeah, does having a queer character in a coming of age film make us think differently about that genre, or in some way kind of subvert that genre?
Well, I think it has to do a lot with the suffering, because queer people have experienced more suffering in their lives, so it's the most common thing to speak of and express. When you have the opportunity to express yourself as a filmmaker, the first thing you have to say is about your own experience and your own trauma. So maybe the coming of age queer stories are more dramatic or more darker than the straight ones, and more for sexuality, of course, theme.
Yeah, I can see that. Anyone else on this?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said, Tanasis, about the suffering. It does seem as if a lot of queer stories have to center themselves in that, because that's kind of what, especially the ones which are more mainstream and the ones which are seen by straight audiences, it almost seems as if that's what they know and what they almost want to see, because that's what they just assume that the queer experience is. And it's like, actually, no, there's, after that, you know, obviously that it can be quite traumatic for a lot of people, but after that, a lot of stuff goes on as well. There's a lot more to those stories. There's so much joy in the world as well. So I hope that's what we're moving towards as we. Oh gosh, sorry. I think that's my opposite package. I'm so sorry. I'll pass that over to someone else. I'm sorry.
Joys of Zoom. I think what's interesting about that is that it feels like there's kind of two separate issues at play. There's the role that coming of age stories serve for queer audiences, and they're so important. I think I remember just watching films as a teenager, and really, you know, when you see yourself on screen, you connect with it. But then at the same time, at the other end of things, there is how the industry potentially perceives queer narratives and queer filmmaking. We've kind of touched on this a little bit, but as queer filmmakers, do you feel that pressure, that expectation to tell certain stories over others? Does that really impact your work? Completely.
Like, I think you know, whether we like it or not, like the gatekeepers are often from the heteronormative world, and it means that there is a lot of it's really hard to convince people this is actually you know, an angle on the queer experience that is needed or fresh or whatever, because they are prescribing what, you know, the queer experience is, and they're also paying for the film or whatever you're making. They are the gatekeepers in a way. So it you know, speaking for Australia specifically, it feels like, yes, we are moving forward, and there is a lot of really progressive conversation, but we're still learning how to like genuinely accept, you know, diversity in the point of view of the person, of the creator and the storyteller.
I also think sorry, I was just going to say, jumping off of that point, I also do think that, like, quite often if you're writing something which has got nothing to do with the fact that that character is queer, if it's just like a crime drama and you're like, actually, and also the lead character is going to be queer, they're always sort of like, yeah, but okay, so like, how can we use that? And it's like, well, we don't necessarily have to. It can just like, it can be a part of their life, and obviously it colors their experience, and it's, you know, it's an important part of their identity and everything, but like, it doesn't necessarily have to inform the sort of like main drive of the story. It can be just like, I feel like it's a step towards normalizing things, or you know, making things not such a big deal. It's to just sort of just let it be, if that makes sense, with a lot of characters.
That's a really good point. And again, I think that thing about no matter where you set your film, if it's like in space, in the Wild West, if it's got queer characters in it, then it's a queer film, and that's what it's going to be about. It's really it's really interesting. I mean, we kind of got a very broad picture now of the genre and how you guys feel about it within queer cinema. So I'm just going to come to you each in turn about some projects that you've been working on that explore what a queer perspective can bring to other genres and look beyond that coming of age genre, as much as we love it and we cherish it and we're not bashing it. So Nosa, let's start with you. Can you tell us a bit about your film Something in the Closet?
Yeah, so Something in the Closet is sort of it's about a queer sort of young female character whose secret manifests itself into a literal monster in the closet. And yeah, I guess it was sort of just inspired by sort of I guess early like Spielberg-esque films, just because I wanted to see, when I was growing up, like I just kind of wanted to see queer characters in those films, or like someone that even looks like me, essentially. And I was just like, well, you know, I'm gonna write it. Let's try that. And so that's what it is.
Amazing. And you've kind of spoken previously about how it's a coming out story, but it's not about the protagonist coming out to other people. It's about them kind of exploring their own identity internally and personally. Can you just describe how you used elements of horror as a genre to explore those ideas?
Yeah, so the idea came about just obviously from the phrase coming out of the closet, that sort of thing. And just I really just wanted to be working more and more in genre because that's sort of what I enjoy watching. And I was kind of just figuring out how to use that as a metaphor for like a more interesting story. And so it was kind of just figuring out what genre would make sense, and then obviously sort of landed more on the sort of horror slash, I guess it's kind of fantasy just because of the monster, but like more on the horror side, and kind of you know, using those queer coded techniques, but like being a bit more overt about it. But yeah, I think also in terms of like wanting to tell a story that's more focused on the identity of the character and her telling herself, like that was really important for me, because I think it goes back to sort of what everyone has been saying on the panel, is kind of like, you know, first of all, our stories don't necessarily always center ourselves. If it is a coming out, like if it's a coming out experience, it's always the character that's coming out to someone. So that's the like big story there. And it's kind of just like, that wasn't really my experience, so like I didn't want to tell that. It was more like being a bit more personal with it, and exploring those like inner thoughts and, you know, feelings that you have in yourself. And then also yeah, I think that's kind of the way. Sorry, I feel like I'm rambling a bit.
Cool, that's really interesting. I'd love to hear a bit more about those like early Steven Spielberg references as well, and how they kind of came to bear on the film.
Yeah, so my cinematographer and I, so Anna McDonald, who shot the film, we just really loved yeah, just, you know, Jurassic Park and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, E.T., even E.T. is a big one. If you see our poster, you can definitely see the influences. But yeah, we really just wanted to sort of put that mark on it. And so we, you know, using the same sort of camera shots, and, you know, kind of more focusing on like subtleties in the performances, and, you know, sort of getting a bit closer to the character, so they're telling the story again through performance rather than words. Because I guess I usually write scripts where they're more wordy, I guess, and this is sort of one of the first scripts that I had written that like pretty much has no dialogue essentially. But then in that way I found that it was actually obviously more universal, because it's just like, you know, you're kind of just getting it through more performances. So we actually got a lot of you know, schools in other countries and things like that wanting to show the film, because obviously it was just, people could understand it more because it was just literally about that feeling rather than the words behind it. But yeah, it kind of all just came about from taking little cues from early Spielberg films, really.
That's really interesting, and that the way in which those internal things become sort of external and visualized in a really kind of heightened way is just really exciting to watch. You describe yourself as a platform agnostic, and it's really exciting that kind of, as well as having variety in the genres and then the kinds of stories that you tell, there is also variety in the platforms that you're using to tell them, whether that's AR or video games. What advice would you give to filmmakers looking to move into more interactive kinds of storytelling?
I just say just try it. I think, because I think, you know, the space essentially, when you think of, you know, I don't know, multi-platform or, you know, VR, AR and all of that sort of stuff, you think, oh, it's going to cost loads of money, you need loads of equipment and things like that. And actually the way I got into the industry in the first place was through sort of doing multi-platform works, just because we have access to things that are multi-platform, like social media. That's essentially, you know, a new technology. And then figuring out different ways to do AR that can be, you know, from a phone rather than from a headset, because headsets are very expensive. Whereas like everyone has a phone in their back pocket. So, and also, you know, there's a ton of apps that let you create your own AR stuff. And so it was just being a bit more, you know, trying to cut through the noise and be like, okay, well, what can my USP be, I guess, as a filmmaker, but that will also allow me to like break in and not break the bank. So it was just, yeah, figuring out all of that sort of stuff. So I'd just say, just try it and use the knowledge that you already have, because I'm sure people coming up now grew up with the internet. So it's just like, you have that knowledge, and it doesn't need to be such a like a space where you think only rich people can exist in and make work in.
Absolutely, like use what you have at your disposal already and the knowledge that is specific to you. Amazing. Kind of going back a little bit, but so Nosa was hooked on genre films as a kid, and I've kind of heard like anecdotally that lots of queer people, I mean myself included, were kind of big on genre when they were younger. I mean, for me it was like superheroes and X-Men. Weirdly, Hugh Jackman, for some reason I had a massive connection with. Does that resonate?
Guilty.
I know, I don't know where it came from, just for some reason. Van Helsing film, what was going on? Does that resonate with the panel more broadly in any way? You know, do you think queer people are drawn to genre even when we're not seeing queer characters in those films?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, growing up, I identified as a witch for quite a few years. I think that was just basically like a sort of a conduit, or like a go-between in terms of like me coming out. I guess it was like the step before me coming out, and I always feel like maybe it was just me sort of like throwing everything at my parents that I possibly could, so to see what their reaction would be. And they were actually quite like understanding. They were just like, okay, here's some crystals, here's some like incense, I guess, get on with it. So like for me, those kind of genre films and TV were very much a way of like a method of sort of self-discovery. So I definitely relate to that for me.
Yeah, I think there's something about outsiders, isn't there, in that kind of finding those people that have something special about them that you can kind of and are celebrated for being outsiders is really
I always found that I would play computer games and choose the female character, like in Mortal Kombat or like Tomb Raider, and would just like slay my mates, and like they would choose these big men and I would be like, I'm gonna choose like katana and like cut you down. And I didn't really know why I was always drawn to this, but I look back now and I'm like, oh, I was gay as fuck. And also like I think I was trying to prove that, like, you know, no, I can do it. Like I can be in a female body and I can prove you wrong. You know what I mean? It was so empowering. So yeah, little clue there maybe.
Also, I feel like it makes sense because, you know, I feel like watching those as a younger kid, like watching genre stories in general, it was very much about escapism as well, and just like not having to deal with like a lot of stuff, even if it was just like my own internal stuff. It was just like, you know, just pop on a lot of things that were just completely not of this world and get sucked into that.
This is making my heart warm. Let's move on now to so Thanasis, in contrast to Nosa, you've kind of spoken a little about how with your short Escaping the Fragile Planet, you weren't really kind of exploring coming out or queerness. Can you just tell us a little bit about what the film is about?
Yeah, so the film is a boy meets boy tale, a few hours before the world ends. I was inspired by Before Sunrise, so I'd like to hope, I hope it's like a queer version of it, as a short film, of course. And also, I'm a sucker also for fantasy, Steven Spielberg, as Nosa said. So I always like to put the fantasy element in my films, or yeah, I don't know, strange visuals in general. So I came up with this idea of ending the world as a ticking clock for the story, as a ticking clock for those two characters that are strangers and they have a specific amount of time to share some intimate moments, and created this small love story in the science fiction genre. Of course, back in the day and in my mind, as I was looking for references, I was getting inspired about the surroundings and the big fog and all that stuff, and the masks. In my mind, that was like a strange or exotic thing, something out of this world. And we saw this in 2019, and then reality happened. So now people tell me that how relatable that is, but it shouldn't be relatable, you know. So yeah, that's the story.
It's a really beautiful film, and I think Fiona from the Film Academy can now show us the trailer. Magic of technology, look at that.
Δουλεύεις καιρό εδώ? 3 χρόνια. Έχω έρθει 2-3 φορές, δεν σε έχω πετύχει νομίζω. Μένεις κοντά? Ναι, λίγα τετράγωνα πιο κάτω.
Amazing. And once again, you can watch Escaping the Fragile Planet for free on BFI Player. As you said previously, that the film really does focus on these two guys. They're just on a date, really, for the majority of it. Can you tell me a little bit more about that decision to set it at the end of the world? Like you said that it's about raising the stakes. Why was it important to have that as the context?
Well, as I said, I was looking for like a ticking clock, and I was heavily inspired by Before Sunrise, because as you remember, it was, of course, a straight couple, and they had to, you know, move on with their lives, and they had one day to share. So I don't know really why it was the end of the world. Maybe I don't know. I'm like dramatic like that. I don't know.
it really works. It's really you do feel that sort of the significance and the importance of this meeting because of that context. I'm also really fascinated by the pink fog that we see throughout the film. I mean, when I think about the world ending, I don't often imagine that it will be pink, which is just a wonderful thing. Can you just tell me a bit about what that symbolizes for you?
Well, the whole thing, the whole story was a metaphor about time. It was the end of the relationship, the end of our lives, that there's a ticking clock for everything. So it's like the message was, what do you do with this time, you know? And I was also heavily inspired by this episode from Black Mirror called San Junipero, with a lesbian couple that were meeting in a virtual reality, and there was also a ticking clock element. And also the sci-fi colors and the 80s vivid colors like blue and pink. And maybe I think I was inspired regarding the color from that as well. And also in nature, you know, sunrise is usually pink. So it's the end of the day. And we try to grade the film in such a way that this pink is something between sunrise, it's romantic and toxic and dangerous at the same time. So that was we are going for.
Yeah, it's really striking. It adds so much atmosphere. It's wonderful. As well, your two lead actors have such incredible chemistry. Can you tell me a little bit about how you kind of fostered that intimacy with them on screen?
Of course, we rehearsed a lot. They are both professional actors. I haven't worked with actors in a similar way before. So made this kind of format for the short film, because my previous one was more like a visual poem with parallel stories between nature and animals and lovers. Anyway, so for this film, I want to experiment more with acting and more like a linear description of events. Sorry for my English. I'm the only one that's not my native language. Sorry. Okay, so now I lost my train of thought. So yeah, and we rehearsed for them, and basically I learned more from them than I think they learned from me. And we went through the script and through the dialogue scenes, and they had a huge input in that. And also the key was, for my favorite scene, spoiler alert, they kiss. It was like we didn't rehearse that on purpose. We wanted this raw feeling to keep it for the scene and for the camera. And actually, I think that the take I used was the first take of their kiss. So actually, they're kissing for the first time in the film and in reality as well. Stuff like that. And also another scene that I like was also improvised. It was a magic trick that the actor does, and the script had the magic trick with the hands. And the actor told me, I have another one. And I said, okay, don't show it to the other guy and do it on the set. So they did the same with the magic trick. So the reactions were kind of, authentic.
That's really lovely to get that spontaneity on set. That's a really good tip, I think, as well for our audience. This is something we've kind of touched on as a panel a little bit before, but about when it comes to normalizing, in air quotes, queer love on screen, and this idea that queer film is in itself in some way a genre. Does the panel find that as a category, queer film, to be useful to your work? Do you think about your work in that way? Anyone want to lead on that?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no, because it instantly sort of suggests that it's going to be niche, and it's like, human stories are human stories, and we all had to sort of grow up watching very heteronormative stuff on TV. Otherwise, there wasn't very much else on offer, essentially, and we can still, relate to it and see ourselves in it. And so I think that it's useful in the sense of, like, I guess, categorizing for film festivals and stuff like that. But in the sense of, like, making a film, I always like to think of it as something which is going to be relatable to everyone, hopefully, or will at least sort of be of interest to people who don't necessarily share the experience of those characters. And so I think it's a kind of it's not clear cut. I don't think it's a difficult one.
I think we're trying to cater to the broader audience, but at the same time it can feel like a box to say it's queer cinema, where we're battling 100 years of people's conception of what queer cinema is, which I think really stunts progression and growth, particularly when we're fighting to put something on the screen that's maybe outside of what's expected. But at the same time, we benefit from a whole canon of queer cinema and that's come before us and got us to where we are. So it's absolutely a double-edged sword, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I just echo what you guys saying. But I also think it's like maybe more useful to lean on like the theme of what the film is, rather than being like, this is a queer film only. It's like the themes are what makes it relatable. So that's what I tend to lean on.
It's kind of interesting as well, the point you made, Matthew, as well about festivals, and that in a number of festivals you will have the queer film category, whereas when you come to Flare, it's, you're getting queer stories, but also you're getting coming of age stories, you're getting sci-fi stories, you're getting thrillers. It's just the full spectrum of what is available within those experiences on show. Thomas, let's come to you next. So you're kind of I want to say a bit of an expert on this subject. Am I right? You did your MA on genre and queer film, whilst making your debut feature, The Greenhouse, at the same time. Can you just give us a quick introduction to The Greenhouse, please?
I'm definitely not an expert, by the way. That's an immense pressure, Billy. But thank you. So the greenhouse, I have two mums. I was raised in regional Australia, and 3 out of 4 of my siblings, myself included, are queer. And so I wrote a film about my mother's battle with cancer, and basically, the concept of losing a parent and the grief that came with that, and simultaneously the yearning that I had for a simpler time, and once you cross that threshold of losing somebody that's close to you, it's very easy to look back and wish that you'd had more awareness of what was about to happen, and how much things were going to change. So the greenhouse is kind of a sort of a fantasy. People are saying fantasy and science fiction, and I'm saying magic realist, but I'm just letting it be whatever. So it's sort of a fantasy film about the eldest child of 2 women who finds a sort of portal in her family home that can take her back in time. So she starts kind of instead of moving forward, she becomes quite dependent on going back in time and reviewing the past, and studying that more idyllic and simpler time.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And now show us the trailer, I think.
Have you spoken to Andrew?
No, I haven't. And hello to you too, Dooney.
He wants to bring his new boyfriend to Mum's shindig.
You're back in town? Yeah, I'm here. Do you still live here?
Do you remember my friend Lauren? I saw her today. She asked me how the mums were doing.
Look who decided to wake up. How was the trip?
Oh, it was great.
You seeing anyone? Did you go back
Where?
to before?
Promise me you'll look after your mum and mum. Sure, I know what to do without me.
Maybe we left them up here too long.
I don't want to go back in that place. The past is just the past. We'll get out of here soon. Promise.
I can't leave. No, you're lying. No, I can't leave. Live here. I didn't mean it.
Amazing, thanks Fiona. And again, you can catch The Greenhouse on BFI Player for the duration of the festival. I very much would recommend that you do. Thomas, I wanted to ask, how did your kind of the academic research and the theory surrounding queerness and genre kind of play into the practical filmmaking process with this project?
Yeah, I mean, the theory came first, and I think before the theory there was a frustration in me, kind of, making my work and going, I don't know how to convince people that there's more to say as a queer person, you know what I mean? And so I went and did my master's degree and thought, I'm going to do as much research as I can on queer storytelling and queer narrative, with a particular focus on the future and how we move forward as a community of storytellers and empower each other actually to take scary steps into genre and push what queer cinema can be. That was all very theoretical and really engaging, and then the actual translating of that into an entire feature film was crazy and so exciting and so big and scary. But I think at the end of the day, the theory really created a bedrock for me of like a real conviction of, you know, I wanted queerness to be baked into the fabric of the film, but not be the storyline in the way that my upbringing, you know, my two mums packed my lunch for school and I went to school, you know, and I wasn't waking up being like, I have lesbian mums, you know, I was just waking up in my home. And I was really, you know, it was very important to me that this film felt like a film about grief and family, and queerness second, you know what I mean? So I think that theoretical research that I was doing really helped kind of, I felt like I was doing the right thing, you know what I mean?
And you also mentioned this was your first feature film after making a number of shorts, including kind of genre shorts like St. Augustine. How did you find that sort of step up from short film to a feature, particularly with regard to kind of the genre elements, I guess?
Yeah, it was, I mean, my shorts had always really pushed genre, and I'd always wanted to, you know, I wanted to see myself in genre. You know, that's the stuff that had excited me as a kid. And then it felt like one day somebody said, but you only get art house. Like, yeah, you love this, this, and this, but you get to make art house because you're LGBTIQ plus. And I felt like I got shortchanged. You know, I was like, well, I want to do the big stuff. I want to have, you know, queer characters in action scenes, and I think that's healing. Like, I think the broader community needs to see that. That's really empowering. So the shorts were always kind of like testing the waters somewhat, but this really was a foray into fantasy and magic and stuff. And so it was, to be perfectly honest, it was really terrifying because I had to convince everybody that we were doing something that would make sense and that was going to be good. And I myself was sometimes going, well, this feels brand new. I don't have a precedent here that I can reference and be like, well, they did it in Pan's Labyrinth because Pan's Labyrinth wasn't queer, you know, and people were kind of like, is this going to work? And who knows if it has.
I think it has.
Totally.
I think a lot of our audience as well would be curious about film school generally, and this is something I guess the rest of the panel can weigh in on, because you were making this as you were completing a course, and I wondered, what does the panel think about film school generally? What does it give you as a director, but also what should young people take into consideration when considering whether or not to apply? If that makes sense. I've rambled through that question, but any thoughts are welcome.
I mean, I guess I can't really comment that much, just in the sense that I had a bit of an unorthodox route into all of it, in the sense that I came from an acting background into the sort of filmmaking side of things, and so I already had a kind of foot in the door with the industry. So yeah, I'm a random one.
That's an interesting perspective as well, like to come from, yeah, how did you find that coming through acting into sort of the other side of the process, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, for me, initially, it just came from the narcissism of wanting to put myself in stuff, to like build my CV and to build my show reel and everything. And then I found that I actually just really enjoyed it. And that's when I started just writing films more generally and writing for TV a bit more generally. But it definitely, I think it does definitely, there are loads of transferable skills for sure. And just in the sense of like having experience on set, just and having experience on set when like things are falling apart and knowing that like things are fine are very useful things to have when you're directing, I think, for sure.
I definitely feel like when it comes to students and talking to people who, you know, prospective students who want to go to film school, who are from marginal backgrounds, you enter an environment where anybody can speak into your work and anyone can and give you feedback, and it's encouraged. Like in my last degree, we would have like 25 people at a table tell me, I don't like this, I don't like that, I don't get that, and it's impossible to vet who is in that room. And I would encourage anybody from a marginal background to have the ability to say, I don't want that feedback or that feedback, because it really can derail the process of developing something, and you're allowed to say that, you're allowed to ask for that.
Yeah, staying kind of attentive and looking after yourself within those spaces where people are kind of feeding back to you. Go next to Matthews. I'm rattling through things. But you've worked across TV and film and as an actor, as you said. I'd like to talk a little bit about Vamping, which is a series about queer vampires currently in development. So for the audience, I know that you can't sort of go into any kind of specific detail about it because it's all under wraps. But a lot has been said about queer subtext in the vampire mythology generally. And what was it that drew you to this genre specifically?
I think definitely the idea of otherness and the fact that, you know, vampires had to exist kind of in the shadows for so many years in a similar way that that queer people did throughout history. But also, I think, I mean, the thing that I initially sort of was drawn to vampires when I was much younger, just because like I really fancied some of the characters in Buffy. That was the initial reason that I first started watching. And it just actually like, it just really, really like, it just meant that I actually like then became obsessed with that as a genre, and the Lost Boys and Charmed and all that kind of, all those kind of, that canon of that genre really just spoke to me. And also one of the first ideas that came to my head was, because it's about a drag queen vampire, one of the first ideas that came to my head was how, like, what happens when a drag queen no longer has a reflection? Like, how on earth are they going to contour? And I was like surely it means that like that's going to be a huge life-changing thing for someone, but particularly someone whose like career is kind of about the way that they look and the way that the fact that they're able to see themselves and have a reflection. And so that sort of just like started it, and then the rest was just kind of running wild within that genre and having a lot of fun.
That's such a it's a great question. What happens when a drag queen can no longer see their reflection? I also just want to ask a quick question: are you Team Angel or Team Spike for Buffy?
Oh,
or is that going to set up a whole argument?
Team Spike, but he did some bad things. He did some he's like when he was evil, he wasn't good.
There's a really kind of big and established canon of vampire films and shows out there, Buffy included. How do you bring your own kind of voice and perspective to something that is so kind of well established?
Yeah, I think coming up with new rules to the world for sure is one part of it, because I think obviously there's like so many different types of vampire mythology, whether it's from various European countries. There's African vampire mythology, there's Christian vampire mythology. And I think we've often seen just one version of it, which is the sort of Christian version of it, or the more recent version of it. And so I think part of it is about bringing a fresh or a version that we haven't seen much of before. And also I think some of the more recent genre shows, particularly in that canon, haven't really spoken to me very much, just in the sense that it feels like they're led by the genre rather than using it as a form to tell a story. It's like the genre feels so heightened to the point where I kind of switch off, to the point where like nobody's talking to each other normally. It's just like all the dialogue is so heightened and sort of almost like thespian that I don't really connect to it as much. And so I think part of why I was drawn to it was just like, I would love for this to feel grounded in the world of East London drag. It's a world that I know very well. It's a world that I feel I haven't seen on screen very much, whilst also just being able to talk about current issues and not feel too causey.
Yeah, using the genre to kind of as a way into exploring things that you're interested in, as opposed to kind of just slapping it on top.
Exactly, yeah.
There they are.
Yeah.
So you've also been a BAFTA Flare mentee, which is I think something that the audience might not know that much about potentially. So I'd just love to hear a little bit from you both about what that mentorship experience is like and how you came to that opportunity.
Yeah.
Matt,
do you want to start, Nosa?
No, you go, mate.
All right, okay. Well, first of all, you make great friends, as Nosa's evidence of that. We had a really, really lovely group on our year. And yeah, it's just part of it is definitely having peers and friends afterwards from within the industry. But yeah, a major part of it was that at Flare, we went and saw lots of films. We had some amazing Q&As, and then throughout the year, BAFTA and the BFI organised various Q&As with some really brilliant writers and directors, and we were just able to have like in a small group, have FaceTime with really great people. Like we had a Q&A with Luca Guadagnino, with just like 4 of us chatting to him about Call Me By Your Name and about his other films and stuff. And so it was like for hours, yeah, for ages. It was really, really great. But then otherwise, I think another big part of it was just the mentorship. We've partnered up with people who are in the industry who are sort of, I guess further along in their careers in terms of, in terms of their film careers. And so mine was John Cameron Mitchell, who was a really, really brilliant support, and we're still really good friends. I actually saw him the other day for a walk, he's in London. And so it was just a sort of having someone as a touch point in the industry where, generally it can feel as if things, you're not very tethered, if that makes sense, when you're working in an industry where you've got various projects with lots of different companies and everything. Having a person to sort of go to ask for opinions and advice is really, really, really helpful, and it's just something which was a massive gift from the program. Sorry, I've rambled on. No, sir.
Not at all. And how do you kind of come to that opportunity? Sorry, that you have to apply for?
No, you haven't at all. I think that's it. Sorry, my connection might be a bit unstable, so like if I jump in and out, that's why. But yeah, no, I think everything that you said, Matt, and then also I applied mainly because I actually didn't have a queer network at all as a filmmaker, and I was just like, oh my god, what's going on? And so it was a really good like a good conduit for like just that, and like making more friends. And as like everyone like consider family, just because of how like great and like we're such a like tight-knit group. And I guess when you apply, the good thing about it is if you get on it, it's very much personal. So like the people that you're paired with, you get to pick and you get to say, this is what I really want to, learn in this year, or like the skills that I really want to have at the end of the year and things like that. And I had Wayne Yip, who's primarily a TV director, but I remember like growing up watching Misfits and like just other shows, and his name would always come up on episodes that I really loved, and just like the way he would just direct in general. And so I asked for him, and like very like kindly agreed to be my mentor. And I got to go on set a lot with him, and he works in genre, so he works on a lot of Marvel like TV shows, just like just in genre in general. And it was really great for me to just be able to see what it takes to make a show like that, and then like sort of mold it into like how I would then work. And it was great because I also made something in the closet at exactly the same time as I was on the mentorship thing. So he gave me a lot of like like a lot of good advice on doing VFX, or if I had this character, how I could like weave their their thematic story into the genre a bit more and things like that. So yeah, it was great.
It sounds like an amazing opportunity, and as you say, that kind of the lasting community that comes from that. And we've also sort of touched a little bit here on television more generally, and I kind of opening this out to the panel as well. It seems to me, and this might be completely just a personal perception, that we find more queer characters in genre stories on television than we do in film, potentially. And I don't know if that's just because I've watched a lot of Russell T Davies, and there was always Doctor Who and Torchwood and all that sort of stuff, and there's a lot to answer for. But does the panel think that's a fair assessment, that TV is potentially more open to accommodating queerness in genre stories than film?
I think that films are usually, especially Hollywood films, are usually made with huge budgets and have to be distributed worldwide, and the pressure is bigger, and they're taking less risks regarding inclusivity and queer representation. For example, there are countries that have huge audiences, such as Russia or China, that have laws forbidding queer presence and queer scenes. So I think the pressure is bigger, and then the shows, there's in my opinion, there's a difference with films, because there is a show is an online process. It has season 1, 2, 3, and the creators are in touch with their audience, the fandom. So they get feedback from the fandom, and sometimes the fandom calls them out for, I don't know, killing or using a trans character or killing a queer character or queer baiting. So they are improving faster and their reflexes are different than in films where, you know, you make some decisions like 2 years ago and the film is out there, you cannot change it. But the shows can change, and they usually take into consideration where they're being called out from season to season. So I think that's the main difference between those two industries.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't sort of considered that it might be a budgetary thing as well, that it's considered less of a risk on TV because you are working with smaller budgets. And also, like, as you say, that the ability to shift and adapt from season to season. What about the rest of the panel? Any thoughts on the TV film difference?
Yeah, I think that, like, just in terms of the, like, TV is a continuing arc, whereas, you know, film, you just get that amount of minutes. And I think that's why so many people feel shortchanged by, you know, queer characters in film, because there's not enough time to tell like a nuanced story. So people kind of just leave it up to, like, you know, the imagination. Oh, that character was kind of queer, but were they? You know, that sort of thing. Where it's just like, it's like queer coded and you're just like, okay, cool. Whereas like with TV, you can really explore and be like, no, they actually are queer, you know. That sort of thing.
But also there's the thing of in TV, I think quite often you find that a queer character might be introduced slightly later on. So it's almost as if they're kind of building an audience to start off with, and they're getting people hooked on the show. And then by the time they introduce a queer character, like, I guess it's almost as if they're hoping that people like won't switch off because they actually want to know what happens next. So then it's almost like a sort of sly way of like sneaking them in, which I mean, you know, it's not ideal, but like if it means that there's more characters on screen, I guess it works. But like I was thinking about that recently. I was watching a show and I was like, actually they've really introduced this character quite late, and I wonder why that is, and I was wondering whether that had anything to do with it.
I also feel like you've got a whole lot more people collaborating on a TV show, and particularly writers and people from a whole intersection of backgrounds. So you're going to have a whole lot of other sort of experience in the cooking pot, so to speak, when, you know, we all know that film is traditionally, you know, catered towards a certain type of person. And I don't really even need to state who that is because we all know who that is, but it's like that therefore means that kind of means the formula is working against all of us. So TV is just like a wonderland, you know, we're all having a blast in TV.
On a Flare film panel, maybe we should. I'm loving that we're just, film's great, let's do more film.
Right decisions regarding the casting, and for example, Sense8 with a trans girl playing a trans girl, or Euphoria, or Pose, and then you have Danny's girl, you know. So it's also that.
We love film though. We do love film, which is why we're here. But at the same time, there are differences, I think, and then those are kind of good to weigh up. I'm just getting a message from the Film Academy that says it's fine to talk about TV, and it's like, good. I'm really, I wanted to kind of ask a few more questions again, more broadly about genre and queerness in film as we kind of move towards coming up to the end of the panel and to audience questions. I think what's really interesting to me is looking at the kind of range of projects represented in the panel. There's a lot of sort of the darker realms of things. We've got horror, we've got vampires, we've got the end of the world. Do we think we're more likely to see queer characters in certain genres over others? Is the world, you know, potentially ready for a queer character in a slasher film, but not as an action hero?
It's a great question. I think personally speaking, I am drawn to the more serious genres, so to speak, and I felt, but I also like woke up one day and was like, I really want to make something that's like joyful and almost like stupidly sugary and queer and has action in it. I don't know, like just something completely left field. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'd open up to you guys as well. What do you think?
I mean, I was thinking the other day about when, I mean, not to conflate the two things in terms of race and sexuality, but when I went to see Black Panther, And walking out of that cinema, I just felt so powerful. I felt like I could do anything. I felt like I could literally, I felt like I was him. And I was like, is this what people feel like all the time? Is this what, you know, but is this what white people feel like all the time when they go and see these like superhero movies? And it obviously like did amazingly for them. So I wonder whether actually like with the superhero genre, and obviously it's like, it's not going anywhere, it's still so lucrative, whether it is just a case of doing it and actually like, hopefully, because Black Panther was a risk, I guess, probably for that studio, but it like really, really, really paid off. And I wonder if actually like writing a really brilliant superhero movie or in that sort of canon with a queer character in the lead role, like, because it hasn't really been done yet, they haven't really got anything to go off of. And I understand obviously about China and Russia, but like the US and the UK and Europe and various other places are huge, huge markets. So I wonder whether actually like that would bolster things and hopefully change minds.
That's a really nice way to actually lead into the next question I wanted to ask, which is, what are the panel's hopes for queer stories in genre narratives going ahead? Are there any genres that you really want to see queer characters in, or is there just anything generally that you'd love to do with genre? Just seem nodding.
Yes, sorry, yeah.
I don't want to jump in.
Trying to think about how to answer.
Yeah, I think variety is where it is at. I want to live in a world where there's too many options, and that, you know, that we're all making work in every genre and inventing new genres. Like I think we have lived long enough under the thumb of someone else, and the point for me is that we encourage each other and push each other to go to envision a different world and push for it, you know. So in saying that, I definitely want to direct the first superhero gay film, and I'll fight all of you for it, so back off.
I'll be buying my ticket for it, don't worry. I will be, there in the audience.
Just do it with me. I can't do it alone. Just come and do it with me.
I completely agree. I think just having a variety and recognizing actually the spending power of queer people, and actually the sort of the viewership numbers of queer people, that they're like actually more than enough to also be lucrative, you know. And I think that's obviously like a big question. It shouldn't just be for money, but like I feel like we can produce enough money to like get stuff made. Yeah. So, you know, so I would agree though.
And besides the superhero genre, I would like to see more queer characters in animated films, which are mostly targeted to kids. That are in the age where you feel the most vulnerable at, and the need to relate to someone. And when I grow up, there wasn't really a queer representation. There was like maybe Ursula in Little Mermaid, that wasn't, of course, inspired by Divine, but was depicted as a villain. And then there was Scar in Lion King, that was a bit effeminate, but also depicted as a villain. So it was like a way to show that homosexuality is bad in kids back when I was growing up with animated shows. And of course, I would like to see more characters in Pixar films that are mostly great, but not like hinted, but actually, you know, celebrated.
Really, really solid. No, so sorry, did you have something on this as well?
No, I was going to say that I kind of want to see more queer characters in animated films as well. And I think like the last one I saw was maybe like Legend of Korra, but you know, they waited until the very end to reveal that and then like decided to carry it on in the comic books. And it's just like, I hope it can just, you know, exist there. And even if it's like a thing like we were saying earlier, it's not talked about, it just happens, and it just is. But I think that, you know, I think queerness, you know, there are so many societal issues to talk about and like commentaries to like be made, and so, you know, genre films just, you know, give the viewer something to look deeper into, because there's effectively like two storylines going on that are interlinked at the same time, which, you know, is quite, yeah, it's quite cool to, you know, see and take in. So I think they'll probably pop up in every single genre imaginable very soon. But, you know, we out here, so we'll do it.
They're really bright future ahead. I mean, amazing. We're now going to head on to audience questions for the last 15 minutes, and there are loads of exciting ones coming in. So first of all, we have Lauren, who asks, how did you find your collaborators early on as a director? How did you find writers and DOPs and crew to work with, particularly before you had any money for a budget? Anyone want to jump on that, finding collaborators?
So, I mean, for me, definitely, I found a lot of people online, and with my first couple of films, I found people online on websites like Shooting People, and I can't remember what other ones I used, but like, I think Facebook pages and stuff as well, just finding sort of students who just wanted to get experience initially. Because yeah, my first few films I just funded with like a weekend job working waitress, so I didn't have much money to offer basically. And then after that, I guess it was events like this, and you know, networking with people at the BFI and at various just film events, because there are lots and lots of networking events which are very open to everyone essentially. And so it was just a case of trying to I mean, obviously, I know it's a lot easier living in London, being able to just pop up, you know, up the road to South Bank to do that. But I think that was a big part of it for me.
And Alex has actually just put in the chat the link to the BFI Film Academy networking Facebook group as well. So make sure that you join that. In it already, it's a little cheeky plug there. Anyone else on finding collaborators, or are you okay to move on? Any big thoughts?
I was raised like in rural Australia, so there was no pathway for me in any way. There was just kind of movies on TV, and that was kind of the vibe. But I found that I had to kind of just force my friends to do things, and they're all now like professionals in the industry. But to begin with, I was just like, shoot my film. My friend who I grew up with, and so I kind of found it was that, and then on the other side it was looking for courses to study, and actually going to the city and studying short courses and long courses, or whatever I could do to you know, learn the technique and meet people who were just as, you know, stupidly enthusiastic as I was about film, and then just attaching yourself to them and never letting them go ever.
Amazing. Yeah, find the people that you really gel with, and then have lasting collaborations. A really good question from Angela, which I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on, is what advice do you have for non-queer writers to write queer characters, particularly when it comes to coming of age stories? It's a big question.
It's a big question.
I would just say talk to your friends. If you've got any queer friends, definitely talk to them, or reach out to people to see if you can just sort of not run stuff by them to ask their permission or anything. But I think when you're in general, when you're writing about an experience other than your own, I think it's always just really good to involve people from whatever community it is, and just that's what I would say initially. And also just like do as much research as you can, watch as much queer cinema as you can, and interviews and TV, and just kind of immerse yourself as much as you would if you were writing something about, you know, a small tribe in a remote village somewhere. And not that we're as niche as that, but like I think just like treat the research as, you know,
we are in Australia.
Not as niche as that, I know. But I think just like
living as a Londoner.
I think like approach it as such, just so that you make sure you're like covering all bases.
Yeah. I think finding someone to work with who you can either put some money in their bank account or give them a role on set or something to help upskill their what they're trying to do in their lives is also a really great way of, you know, of also not necessarily exploiting someone. Not that that's what you're going to do, but it's also really good to have those people around you to encourage, you know, a new angle for your writing, or get a co-writer as well. Always a good option.
Yeah, I was going to say co-write, because I think it's just like the experience will be in it even more. But then also, as Thomas just said, like having a crew maybe filled with like the people that you're writing about as well. Because I think what I got from my short, like a note that I got from someone in the audience one time, was that like they were like, you could like tell that, you know, our crew had a mix of people in it just because of how it was shot and how it was done. And it's just kind of like, it only comes through, you know, in the visuals if your team actually reflect what you're talking about.
Solid advice. A question from Juliet. How do you balance a queer story with a wider, maybe more mainstream story? I find it hard to make the queer story prevalent enough when I want the wider story to dominate more. I guess that's about kind of balancing different themes and narratives. Any thoughts on that?
I feel like the word mainstream is tricky just in general, because it's like, what makes, who decides what is mainstream or not, or who decides what should be mainstream or not, essentially. Because I think part of it, obviously, like, I understand there's a financial aspect of it, but part of that financial aspect is the amount of money that's put into those films and the amount of money that's put into promoting those films in order to sort of like have the outcome that it has. So I would always say, just like, tell the story you want to tell. Like, you know.
Yeah, but I also think it's like, I guess how think about how you're intertwining, I guess, the queer story with the wider story, because obviously, you know, I guess from the experience that I can offer from my short, it was just kind of like figuring out, okay, the mainstream story of alienation, everyone feels that, all that sort of thing, or, you know, everyone might identify with having a secret, but then what does that have to do with queerness, and then how does that manifest itself physically and, you know, metaphorically in the story? So it's just like figuring out that intertwinedness, if that's a word.
I think also the way that you craft the information that you think you have to give the audience, and questioning, do I have to tell my audience in the first 3 minutes of my film that this character is queer? Do I? And do they have to pull up, you know, a grinder, and that's how we know? Like, that's what I would say is what we've been force fed, is that, you know, well, you need to set this, and this up. And I'm like, do you? Because is that filmmaker over there setting up that information when their, you know, main character is heterosexual? And so asking yourself, you know, what do I actually have to signpost? And often you'll find there's a lot of thematic, juicy, exciting stuff you have to signpost, and the sexuality, identity stuff you don't really have to signpost too early.
All really solid advice. Emily asks, actually, I'm going to come to Thanasis first on this one, because you mentioned something about this previously. I think this question might be in response to what you were saying about animation. Do you agree with the idea that any representation is good representation? How has the queer coding of villains in genre or comic stories affected queer narratives on screen?
Well, not any representation is good representation. It has to be about the depth of the characters and the complex of the characters, and they have to be also, you know, ordinary characters, not only villains. So it depends on the story, and if the story uses the queerness just to be, you know, queer baiting, as we mentioned before, like being, you know, hot and being current, but doesn't really mean it, and doesn't really affect the rest of the story. And what was the other part of the question?
How has the queer coding of villains in genre or comic stories affected queer narratives on screen?
Well, I think we all know the answer to this one. You know, it's basically a comment on homophobia. Basically, it's like the queer characters have to be suffering, or have to be villains, have to be, you know, revengeful, like. So yeah.
Again, it's that finding.
They have to be more healthy characters, and more happy characters, and not just side characters as well. Because I'm thinking now of this picture filmed on with the elves. Onward, I think.
Yeah.
It was like, you know, a cameo of queer character that she implied that she has a partner, and that was it. So that's not enough, you know.
Centralizing it, and yeah, like you say, like making it authentic.
Main characters and complex characters, and not just villains. We've seen enough villains. Maybe we need to turn the page now.
Yeah.
Amazing. We have an anonymous question here that says, how important is it to you to have queer collaborators, including queer actors in queer roles? And how important is it to have as much of a queer crew too? kind of touched on it a bit. But...
I think it's yeah, really important. I would say, you know, making my film, which was such a personal story about my family and my alternative family, and being surrounded by queer artists and creators, was just like a dream come true. And you can feel it in every frame of the film, as Nurse was saying, like that it was crafted by people who understood it, and therefore it was a safe space for me as well to create. And I think that's really important, that, you know, we put our hearts on the line to tell these stories, and we go away with a group of people to make something, and it needs to be a safe, encouraging space. You know, there's a whole lot of opposition, and it is really hard out there. So I take there's a lot of joy to be found collaborating with queer people, for sure.
I agree. And I think on the point of actors as well, I think something I always bang on about is that it's a big part of it is about opportunity. And I think that's why I'm always keen to see queer people cast in those queer roles, is because we don't necessarily have the same amount of opportunities that straight people do, whereas they've got a whole gamut of possible roles that they can play. Queer people don't often get a look in for those roles, essentially, or very rare, or if they do, they're at a sort of certain level. So I always think it's like good to have as many queer people playing queer people as possible. Yeah, and we should all just strive to do that, just for the sake of, like, you know, even just for the sake of having role models, essentially. Because I remember growing up, even though I could watch queer cinema, I'd then like rush onto Wikipedia afterwards and be like, oh, like, is this person queer? Like, are they like me? And just that sort of heart-sinking feeling of like, this sounds really mean, but like when they're just being like, oh, they're straight. Not being straight's a bad thing at all. But you know what I mean? Just in the sense of like wanting to see yourself reflected, and not necessarily having that with actors in these films. It's sort of like, it does seem like it's a missed opportunity, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, it's wish fulfillment. You know, you're a kid and you need to see a world and you need to see scope for yourself. And I think when we learn that, you know, that actor in that show that we had a massive crush on is queer, it's actually really huge, I think. Yeah. And it's what a lot of other people feel every time they see something. And I think it's beautiful.
I agree.
And again, it comes back to that whole process.
I think like,
sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say just like a 2 cents thing. It's like, I also think about like vibes on set as well, because like making a film, whether it's like short feature, whatever it is hard. So like if you surround yourself with your peoples, it's easier. Like the vibe is easier, and it's just nicer. So.
It is. Yeah.
Is that whole process of finding collaborators, and that if you find the people that you really work well with, and that you, like you say, you feel comfortable and safe around, then that just sort of trickles down throughout the whole process as well. And it's really, you can feel that on screen when something's been made with actual kind of care and love. It follows through. One question from Javier. It's quite a long one, so I'm going to go slowly through it as I'm reading it, because it's tiny font. I am interested in queer cinema, not only as films portraying queer narratives, but also films in which there is an alteration of formality to queer spectatorship. Has the work by the panelists also been influenced by an explicit attempt to express queerness through the formal aspect of cinema, and not only the kind of narrative and the story?
Can I get the second half of that question?
Yeah,
again?
so
I need to down a little bit more.
This might be me reading it, I'm so sorry. Second half of that question is, has the work by the panel also been influenced by an explicit attempt to express queerness through the formal aspect of cinema, and not only what is narratively included?
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna have a go. Let's see. I think queerness for me, and I hope this helps, but queerness for me means subversion, and means, you know, thinking outside the box. And so I think when it comes to the act of creating something, not just writing something and constructing a story, but the way that you shoot it, the way every choice you make, you have the ability to embody queerness in every choice you make. And that is the way I'm answering that question. That's my shot.
I think I maybe just need some more clarity, Javier, on what you mean by the formal aspect of cinema.
I'm not sure.
I don't know if you're still on the around, if you can even pop it into the chat, but like,
I think getting some interesting things through the chat though from other people as well, talking about the use of color in film, and that again makes me think of the pink in Tanasis's film. That kind, yeah, that it's not always about story and narrative. So often when we talk about queer cinema, we focus in on character and things like that.
Yeah, that's true.
As opposed to those other aspects of filmmaking, cinematography, and so on.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to answer for anyone else, but like I think what Thanasis was saying about you know, the use of, you know, I guess pink and like of the fog, and you know, you guys were talking about that, and I found that really interesting. So I think like, you know, maybe watch obviously watch everyone's films, but also like Thanasis' film is on the BFI Player, I want to say. I don't know, I'm not going to speak for you.
Well, such a smooth plug as well, just so like amazing. I think we're very much running up to the end of the session. I just want to ask one final question, which is, if in one sentence, your top tip for young LGBTIQ plus filmmakers looking to break into the industry, as short as you can.
If something makes sense to you, then it will make sense to other people.
Solid. Who's next?
Don't listen to anyone who says you can't do it.
Choose wisely where you get your feedback from. On the script, on your first cuts of the film. Choose wisely.
They were already insightful. I don't know, I think I would just say, you know, pick collaborators, because it's better if you're like not alone when you're like first coming into it. It's like there's definitely someone in a position as you, so you know, try and find that person, whether or not it's social media or something like that.
That's a really, a lovely point to end on. So that is, I'm afraid, all that we have time for. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to the audience for watching. We'd love it if you could complete a quick audience survey for us after the session, which Alex will link in the chat, but you'll also get an email because we're very keen to do it. The next Film Academy Flare event is happening at 3 p.m. It's called Family Values, in conversation with Alexa Baconia and Michelle Antoniades. So if you haven't already, you can still register for that event. I would very much recommend you do, because both of those panelists have films in the festival, Colours of Toby and Sweetheart, and they're both absolutely wonderful films. And you can catch them both on BFI Player. So once again, thank you everyone for joining, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Thank you to our panelists.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Lovely to meet you all.
Bye.